Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining me from. I'm so excited today to be here to present Transfer Transition, how one credit courses can be utilized to engage with first-year transfer students. This is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. It is something that I started as a graduate assistant just a couple of years ago, and is something I have continued to develop as I have continued into my full-time professional staff space. So we're going to kick it off with a little bit about me. Currently, I am a coordinator for contemporary students at Contemporary Student Services at George Mason University. Basically, what that means is primarily I work with transfer students, but I also work with adult learners and student parents, as well as some of our other contemporary populations, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about in just a second. I started at George Mason in 2017 as a transfer student myself. So when I was developing this course, I was very familiar with what the experience was to be a graduate, or not a graduate assistant, a transfer student. And I ended up finishing my degree in May 2020. So I also can empathize with where students are currently at with going to finishing up their degree during a pandemic, being an online learner, how all of those things look. And then I continued straight through, and I just finished up my master's in arts and higher education and student development this past August. So when I was getting my master's of arts, this is where I began to start to develop this course. I was a graduate assistant for transfer success, and basically I was in charge of a lot of programming for transfer students. And I'm sure, like many of you, we have seen there's been some engagement struggles with transfer students coming back to more in-person things after the pandemic. Students weren't showing up to things they used to, so I started to get creative about maybe some different ways to engage with students. So before I start, I would love to give a little bit more information about George Mason University, but also Contemporary Student Services where I work. So George Mason is a large public research university in Fairfax, Virginia, which is some of the suburbs outside of Washington, D.C. We have over 37,000 undergraduate and graduate students and 5,000 transfer students a year. Some of our transfer students are in the advanced program. The advanced program is a partnership we have with our local community college system, the Northern Virginia Community College system, where students are able to be kind of dual enrolled at the same time and get started on towards their bachelor degree while they are still enrolled there. 20% of our undergraduates are over 25 years old, so what we would consider adult learners, and 75% of them live off campus and commute to the university. It was named one of the most diverse institutions by US News and World Report in 2021. And one other thing that I like to add is that it is the only public university in the Northern Virginia area. So we have a big population of folks in this area. And since it is the only public university, we attract a lot of those contemporary students. So what exactly is Contemporary Student Services? So what it is we provide hands-on guidance for finding and building resources for students to support them through when they begin all the way to graduation. We host programs, provide peer advising, and advocate for the needs of contemporary students. We do a big emphasis on that advocacy piece. So there's a lot of students that fall under these contemporary identities. Adult learners, students who are commuting, transfer students, married, widowed, and divorced students, veteran and military affiliated, if they took 3 or more years off from college, pregnant or parenting, or if they were foster care alumni. So the reason we kind of have this big list of identities we see as contemporary is because we know a lot of these identities intersect for our students. So the hope is by having one service place where they can go, we're able to understand a lot of these other identities they have at the same time as well. So just getting a little bit more into the transfer population at George Mason University, we enroll about 2,500 transfer students each fall. And I thought these were a really interesting way to look at it because our enrollment numbers have been pretty consistent throughout the last couple of years, even though enrollment has kind of been back and forth or maybe fluctuating a little bit with just students making different decisions the last 2 or so years. So we had higher enrollment numbers in fall 2020 than we had in the last couple of years. They started to go down a little bit, but they've stayed pretty consistent, which just goes to show that students are consistently transferring to Mason. And then in spring, we have about 1,500 students that come each spring, and we do enroll more transfer students than freshmen in the spring semester, and even for the fall semester, it's about even there. And again, also has been pretty consistent. And then I also think it's super important to look at the retention and graduation information. I want to make sure our transfer students are being enrolled, but they're also finishing and graduating. And also almost half of Mason's graduating class each year is made up of transfer students. So the reason I have all of this is to show that George Mason truly relies on our transfer students, and we would not be where we were without them. So taking a quick pause, I would love to know in the chat, I might stop sharing my screen for just a moment, where you all work, but also what brought you to this session. That'll really help me as I begin to go into more information about what the course entails and kind of how it might be able to be used at other institutions. So I'm just going to stop sharing for just a moment. And just if you could just share why you came to the session today, it would be very helpful for me. How it was funded, that's a big piece, and who teaches it. Awesome. Yeah, so I'll go ahead, keep putting that information in, but I'll go back and continue in the presentation. How to support them, consulting role, better serve adult students. That's great intersection at Mason between these populations. Developing a course, library research focus, that's great as well. Okay. These are all super helpful. So it gives me a much better understanding. And as we go in the presentation, I'm definitely going to hit a lot of these topics, but I'm also available after this presentation. If anyone wants to email me and just talk in more detail, I would be happy to do that as well. All right. So a lot of the reason I decided to develop this course, and I'm also the person who teaches it each semester, is what I heard from students and also what I experienced as a student myself. But I wanted to, when I was working on developing it, go ahead and do some additional research as well to just make sure that if it had been tried other places, what works well and what doesn't. So I went ahead and started doing some research, and I was able to find some information from the Community College Research Center, which talked about students in the Virginia Community College system, which was great because it's right where I'm at, and those are a lot of the transfer students I'm serving. So they found improvements in credit accumulation and persistence to the second year for students who enrolled in student success courses in their first semester. So they were doing their academic credits, they were able to get questions answered about that. And it really just helped with persistence to that second year, which if we're able to get our transfer students through their first year and kind of on that path to graduation, coming back for their second year, they're way more likely to finish. I was also able to look at Schlossberg's transition theory, which says students in transition are in need of unique support to allow successful adaptation to their new environment. And I'm sure that's something we all have experienced. We need to be giving some more unique support, especially these last couple of years. And the programs and services that I was doing for students just wasn't working in the same way that it used to. So I wanted to take a look at some unique or maybe different ways of doing things in that new environment. And then I also looked at Flaga's 5 dimensions involved in the transfer process. And there they talk about formal versus informal learning of resources. And I knew that I wanted to try and combine in this course a formal way of looking at resources, but also keeping it informal. So formal in the way that there's assignments and deadlines that they have to hit to make sure they're learning these resources, but also informal so they're learning from their peers and they're really being able to get a feel for the university. Connecting also was really important. I wanted to make sure they were connecting with the university, but also developing those relationships there. Familiarity, I wanted them to feel comfortable with the information they were gathering. So I know when our transfer students come in at orientation, they're given so much amazing and good information, but I know a lot of the times they might feel overwhelmed or just not know how to practically where to put that information. Negotiating, which means adjusting their behavior and surroundings as necessary to be successful within the academic, social, and physical environments. So I wanted them to be able to make adjustments early on if they needed to be familiar and succeed at Mason. So many students share that the Northern Virginia Community College system, where many of them transfer from, is just very different from Mason. So I just want to make sure they're getting used to what it means to be a Mason patriot. And then finally, the hope is that they will be able to integrate and see that shift in identity from maybe a transfer student to a full Mason patriot there. So this is a little bit about the evolution of University 300 at George Mason University. So before fall 2021, this was a 1-credit course that was run by the College of Science at George Mason, and it was specifically for transfer students in the STEM field. So, and there hadn't been one for general transfer students in a number of years. So I went ahead and I looked into a little bit, and it happened to be somebody I already worked pretty closely with. So we started to have a conversation of what exactly does that course look like? And then I reached out to University Studies. So University Studies at George Mason is the program that funds all of the 1-credit success courses for the most part. So I was already familiar with this unit because I taught University 100, which is just a freshman first year student success course. So I reached out to them and I was just asking when it potentially would come back, what was the updates with that, things like that. And they offered for me to teach it, to kind of transition away from that University 100 space to the University 300 since I was already teaching. And really, this is when a graduate assistant being in that role really helped me be able to develop it. I was already doing lots of research as a graduate student into what transfer students were looking for, and I had that own personal experience. So I was able to pull all of that together and develop a new curriculum. In spring 2022, I ran the first 2 8-week asynchronous courses, and we allowed it to run with about 7 students each. Now we try and keep it around 10 to 15 for the minimum to run the course, but since it was the first semester and spring also has some lower enrollment numbers, we decided to keep it with 7 each. And so both of them ran there. That summer, I looked at Nova, which is our local community college, to see what transfer students were learning in their required 1-credit college success course. So I will say this is, I think, where I made a really important decision to look at what our transfer students, many of them may have already taken. And I was lucky to already be able to have a contact there and develop a relationship with them there, where I was able to look at a syllabus, talk with the professor that teaches that one, and just see. I didn't want this to be a class that was really repetitive. Students are not going to enroll in something they feel like they already have at their previous institution. Of course, there's transfer students coming from all over the different institutions, but I wanted to look at least one place where I knew many were coming from. In fall 2022, I ran 2 more 8-week courses, and the first 8-week course filled up. So that was really just a semester by semester difference. I was able to go to orientations and let students know about it, and 22 enrolled for that first course, and then about 16 in the second course. And looking ahead currently, we're having some conversations around adding a summer 2023 course or a workshop. And that's a big thing I also want folks to be able to take away from it today. You can kind of look at how this 1-credit course is structured, but it doesn't need to be a 1-credit course at all. Make it customized for whatever would work best at your institution. It could be an 8-week workshop series. It could look like a lot of different things. So that's also something that I'm exploring for this upcoming summer. Do students want to enroll in a 1-credit course before they're officially coming? So they attend their orientation, then they do an 8-week course, or would a workshop work better? And then I'm also looking at adding an in-person session in fall 2023. But I also think it's important to keep that asynchronous section because my course is able to serve so many adult learners, student parents, that contemporary population at George Mason. So it's really, if an in-person session is added, I would teach that, but I would also expand to letting a graduate assistant know or somebody else to come in and teach that asynchronous section as well. We're lucky at George Mason to have a great relationship with a lot of our graduate assistants and graduate students. So I'm confident that I'd be able to find somebody else to teach it as well. So now we're going to get a little bit more into the content of the course. What materials are being covered? So when I was developing the content for this course, I really was intentional about looking around the university to see what was already there. what kind of things were students already being able to have access to for other units, and then taking from there and linking it there. That way I wasn't developing a course from scratch, really. It was just connecting resources into kind of a map that makes sense for students. So I start off with a welcome video. Since it's an asynchronous course, I think it's important for them to be able to see my face, see what I look like, hear a bit about me. And I also walk them through the syllabus just so they have that experience just like they would if they were going to an in-person or a Zoom class that first session. And then I start off with a Mason checklist, kind of like important things that I've heard from other transfer students that they'd like to check out, especially early on. So it's things like finding your academic advisor, finding your success coach, things like that. Then we start a conversation around transfer shock. Transfer shock was something I was familiar with only a couple of years ago, and that's when I entered the field as a professional. So I start with a conversation around that. They're able to watch a video about it, go through a PowerPoint, and kind of just learn what that term means. And many students have shared that it was helpful because those were a lot of things that they were feeling. The classes seemed to be harder. They were worried their grades were going to drop. And knowing that there was a word or a term around it, they were able to take ownership over it. And even students who weren't experiencing it yet, they found it helpful to look for the signs of it. I also have them fill out a form for drop-in hours. Those are my office hours, but I want them to pick a time and pick topics we can talk about in those office hours that make sense for them. And then we do an on-campus workshop. So even though it's an asynchronous course, I want them to be able to come to campus or join me on Zoom and get a little bit more in depth. So I'll go into more about that in a second. Week 2, adding on to that Mason checklist, we do a scavenger hunt. I want them to feel confident about finding all of the buildings on campus, even if they're not here very often. Knowing where the buildings with most of the offices where they can ask questions are, things like that. We also begin to talk about imposter syndrome. I want to make sure they're feeling confident. And if they are feeling maybe they don't belong in this space, all of those feelings, I want them to be able to think about it early on and know that they can talk about these things with me or with somebody else around the university. I also have a first optional Zoom meeting so they're able to meet me and meet their classmates. We start with that mental health conversation earlier. CAPS is our counseling and psychological services. I let them know where they're located, and actually CAPS usually comes in and does a whole presentation during our workshop week about some mental health concerns transfer students might have when they're in their period of transition or at any point during their time at Mason. Week 3, I think it's important that they're thinking about their career and graduate school readiness. So many transfer students come in and they feel like they're in a rush or they feel like they're behind in these topics. I want to make sure they're talking about it early on. They can utilize the most resources here. That also includes building their network. Financial well-being and scholarships. Sometimes they struggle in that period of transition to know the different costs of things. At Nova, the community college near us, they're able to use financial aid on their textbooks, but then when they come to Mason, they're not able to do that. So a little bit more budgeting and things are needed. And I want them to know that this is part of their health as a student. So it's important to be thinking about these topics. And that goes right into building resilience. At Mason, we have a great Center for Wellbeing, and they have a resilience badge program that students are able to enroll in. So I want them to know about these things so they're able to utilize them. Week 5 is another talk about well-being, but also that on-campus workshop week. So what I do is in that form that they're able to fill out in week 1, they're able to put topics they want to talk about. So then I'm able to take those topics and reach out to units to come talk to them. So we have student support and advocacy at Mason come talk about financial well-being, career services to talk about resumes, whatever they want to talk about, then I invite them. I never go into the course with these preset because the last 3 times I've taught it, each class is different. Each one different things from it. Then we talk about research in week 6, which goes into that continued career readiness conversation. And then I have them do a Mason bucket list. It's kind of a fun activity, low stress. And my hope is that by thinking about things they want to complete during their time at Mason and putting it in this bucket list format, they're more likely to come back and check on it and check those things off, like going to bigger events or going to the career services career fair, things like that. Week 7 is when all the final assignments are due, along with extra credit. So I do offer extra credit in this course, and it can look like going to different events and things like that. So assignments. So I try and make the assignments pair really well with the material that is covered. So the first one is a discussion board. We have weekly discussion boards. So week 1 is easy, just introductions. Week 2, we get into the second discussion board where we're able to talk about academic success and transfer shock. So each week I kind of let them choose between 2 topics they might want to write about. That way they can pick whichever one is more interesting to them, and they're probably more likely to write more. Then they're able to do their first journal, which is a reflection on what brought them to Mason. What has your journey been like so far? What are you hoping to get out of it? What are you studying? What do you think your plans are next so far? And then I really want them to be intentional about this reflection and also realize how much they've done to get to this point and celebrate that a little bit. It can be really overwhelming to come in as a transfer student. I want them to take that time. And then my favorite component of this class, and the one that students have shared that they enjoyed the most for an asynchronous course, is the on-campus participation. So I came up with on-campus participation instead of you get that participation credit in class when you're speaking up, but I wanted this to look a little bit different in this class. So I decided 3 on-campus participations for this 8-week course. Basically, that just means they have to go to campus to go to an event, or if they're online virtual students, they can have a Zoom meeting. It just is a way for them to actually connect with the resources and have a grade assigned to that. So if they go to meet with their academic advisor, that would count. And then they just write a 1-page reflection paper after. So it's truly whatever the student wants to do. And I've had students do vastly different things each semester. There's honestly things that I'm learning from them, even though I was a student here myself. And students have shared that this is probably one of their favorite components of the course, and I think something that's been the most successful. Week 3, their discussion board is looking at the career readiness guide. So our career services center here does this amazing 100-page career readiness guide, which I'm sure I could share with other folks as well. But I kind of have them look through that and pick a page that's interesting to them and share it with their classmates. And then journal 2 is more of a reflection about their career path after Mason, using that career readiness guide, thinking about careers they would like, what skills they need, do they need graduate school? It's just another chance for them to have that intentional reflection space. Discussion board 4 is thinking about budgeting for next semester, or they're able to look through and find a LinkedIn Learning class they would like to take. Through Mason, they have free access to LinkedIn Learning. I want to make sure they know that, so I make it an optional assignment for them. Strengths Finder is also a big thing at George Mason. I'm sure it is at some other institutions as well. I like for them to do that just so they're able to learn more about themselves and think about other strengths they might not consider. And then discussion board 5, they're having a reflection about that. Did they get the results that they expected? Were they surprised by anything they learned? Things along that nature. And then their in-person workshop week that I discussed before. Discussion board 6 is next steps at Mason. It's kind of, they have half a semester under their belt. What would they like to do with the rest of their time there? Being intentional about having them think about that early on. Then I have them submit their resume and cover letter. I was fortunate to also be a graduate assistant at Career Services, so I have a bit of a background with resume review. And I do really intentional, detailed resume review with them early on so that they have that for applying to internships and things that summer. Then I have them do their final assignment as a video. They've done a lot of writing in this course, and I want them to think about the material in another way by doing a video. And the video is just about a 5-minute reflection on the course, but also what are your next steps at Mason? So kind of building off of that discussion board 6. Then I have them comment on 2 other students, and then the final 2 on-campus participations are due as well. So that is an overview. It's only 7 weeks, even though it's an 8-week course. I wanted them to be able to finish the course before midterms or finals, so they're able to focus on their other classes. I want this class to be a tool for them and not something they're stressing about. And then I allow that 8th week to be, they're allowed to meet with me, whatever they kind of want it to be. So going into some successes and challenges, there's definitely been some challenges with this course. And the reason I'm also presenting on it while it's still relatively new is because I know there's been some challenges with programming and everything for the last couple of years, and I'm also excited to hear from some of you the ideas you have and things. But it's been meaningful, intentional programming that's worked for us. Um, so starting off with some successes is the session that filled in fall 2022 after only being back for one semester. Another success is that new transfer students are able to get 1 credit of an upper level 300 course. So coming in, and they're probably going to do pretty well in this course. Most of the students have, as long as they're completing the work. And that can be a great confidence boost. And all students who have taken the course so far and passed have said it was worth their time and they would recommend it. And also a big thing that I thought was a success was the numbers in this course were similar to some of the transfer events attended in spring 2022 and fall 2022. So as someone in a position that does a lot of programming, I was able to see, okay, I'm probably putting a little bit more work into this, but I'm able to see more intentional long-term benefits from it than maybe a one-off event that maybe doesn't take as much time, but I'm not being able to engage with every single student there. The challenges have been marketing to transfer students, getting them to know about the class has definitely been a challenge. Also, having students follow through with coursework, since it's an asynchronous course, it's required a little bit of extra work on my part, which I'm happy to do, but I know not everyone who might be interested in teaching this would have the capacity. It's just sending some extra emails and things like that. And then also getting enrollment numbers up in spring. And this is also a slide that I thought was important to include. This is hearing directly from students who have been in this course. One shared that one of the reasons why they liked it is because it took them out of their comfort zone. If it wasn't for this class, they wouldn't have gone to outside events. So that is directly about that on-campus participation assignment. Another shared that they were hesitant about the purpose of this class because it's only half a semester and only for transfer students, but they received so much information and allowed them to solidify their decision to attend graduate school, as well as the path they intended to walk down. It also made speaking with advisors and getting academic help easier to access. And then finally, we have a student here who transferred from one four-year institution to another. So they shared that this course helped them find the information that they would have been provided if they were a first-year student. They got a lot of information from their previous institution and they thought it would apply similarly here, but they were wrong. And then some takeaways. So this is kind of how this could be used at other institutions. So the number one thing I think that helped me be successful in developing this course was looking for spaces of collaboration. Are there already 1 credit courses for freshmen being taught at your institution? Who teaches those? So for me, it was university studies. I was able to talk with them, and they're the folks who pay for this class. So they also saw it as worth their time and energy. And you never know until you're starting to look around for folks at your institution. What is offered at your local community college? Do you have a community college that has a lot of transfer students? Or do you have a contact over there? Are you able to open up that dialogue with them? Also looking at the orientation office and the online materials they shared with students. So I did this and I was able to see what students were being told at orientation. At Mason, they had a whole Blackboard page full of information that they would do. Utilizing graduate and undergraduate student help when possible. I know in higher ed, we're all spread thin. We might not have the capacity to do this, even if we're interested. So at Mason, graduate students are able to teach these university study courses after completing 18 credits. It might be worth looking into at your institution as well. We also have a paired program with University 100 where an undergraduate student will teach with a full-time staff member. That helps the undergraduate student with some opportunities to learn more, but also lessens the amount of burden on the full-time staff member. This is something I might start to look into with this University 300 course if it starts to expand to other options. So that is something to consider as well. And finally, connecting with your students and making changes if needed and where needed, I think has been the biggest reason this has been successful. So I always ask the students and give them chances to share this information to know what exactly that it is that they want. And then could this format be applied without a class structure? And most of the time, I think the answer is a resounding yes. So I'm looking forward to looking into how it could be offered as a workshop And I think if you're unsure of how this maybe could look at your institution, you want to try some things first. I think looking at it without a class structure would be a really, really great place to start. So to kind of wrap up before we do questions, I would love if you all, I know we have a smaller group here, so I might just stop sharing the screen and we can share out in this bigger group, but thinking about some of these questions that I posed and how it might look at your institution. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but I'll put this in the chat. But this is just kind of a space, like I always ask my students in the asynchronous course, here are some questions, start thinking about it. How could it be applied? How could it look at your institution? So I'll copy that and paste that in the chat. You're all also welcome to start asking questions at this point, and we can kind of just keep the last like 15 or so minutes as a dialogue. I'm kind of here to, I know many of you are looking into starting this at your institutions. I am happy to answer any questions or offer any advice there.
Hey, Caroline, this is really helpful. Let me ask you something. It being online, I think that's really, reaches everybody. I noticed something about the workshop series, and I guess that really is a key component of it, where everybody has to come to the campus. We've got a large contingency of students because we've got 13 fully online degrees from business administration, humanities, nursing even, and they're being taken from all over the country and all over the world. So do you see a course like this being able to be done without bringing the students to campus? I mean, a version of it that could be almost as successful as this one?
I definitely could see it. Honestly, most of the time with that on-campus workshop series, I have a Zoom component as well. So I just invite those units to present the information to students via Zoom. And I find it's really helpful because then students also know that those resources are for them, because we also have a large online learner component. And oftentimes students assume like, oh, those resources are only for those students who go to campus. They're not for me.
Right.
And that way they know that that is achievable for them. And I think a lot of units are happy to present online. A lot of people are used to doing that now. So I could definitely see it being successful.
I got one more question. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm kind of curious. We don't require orientation for transfer students. And it was a big decision made long ago, and there was a lot of different variable reasons on it. And we're thinking about possibly making it required. But I was wondering how many, I guess, is orientation required of every single student at Mason?
It isn't. We try and we strongly encourage it, but especially with our transfer population, we also struggle to get them to go to those orientation sessions. So advertising orientation is not the only way that I let them know about this course. I also get the full list of all new transfer students, and I'm able to send them a personalized email with this course information, but also just a quick overview of other information as well. So that's another thing that you could try here as well. And I think that could also work if you're thinking about this in a workshop format as well.
Do you have a lot of your students in this course who did not go to orientation?
So I'm gonna be honest, most of the students in this course did go to orientation, but I think that's because if you're enrolling in this course, you're already kind of dedicated to learning more about those resources and things, so you're more likely to enroll in it. But I think as I kind of look at those other ways of doing it, I might be able to get more students to come to a one-time workshop or something like that instead of enrolling in a course. Also, I wanted to make note, students are also able to take this for 0 credits. So at Mason, if you go over 15 credits, it's an extra cost. So if they're already at 15 credits, they're able to enroll for this for 0 credits. They don't get the credits there, but they're still able to get the information, and they also get connected with me. I've had lots of students already asking me for letters of recommendation and things like that.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And I appreciate you're already thinking about how this could work. So I also appreciate hearing like your feedback and your questions and things.
Yeah, I was with another major university. I've worked for 3 public universities. I'm at UNCG. I can't change my name for some odd reason. But anyway, I'm at UNC Greensboro, part of the 16 public university system campus. And I was at NC State and North Carolina A&T State before that. And when I came to Greensboro to come home, I'm from here, I found out that they had something like this, but it was a semester long. and then the budget crashes that the public's, experience, they disappeared. They made this course vanish, and they still offer it for first year. And I was like, we need something like this. So that's why I joined in on this. And we've got somebody who teaches a very similar course at the North Carolina Community College system. It's called ACA 122. If you ever want to look it up, it's pretty interesting stuff. ACA 122, and it's taught at every one of the 58 community colleges in North Carolina. And I thought there needs to be a version of it at the university. We need to bring something back, to prevent those stop outs. And so, and we're doing a big study right now of stop outs of who of those stop outs did not go to orientation. So that's a big thing our institutional research is doing right now. So that's why this is like really curious. One of my colleagues in transfer recruiting, she teaches an ACA course at one of the community colleges. So we were kind of eyeballing her to possibly look into this, and she is gung-ho about it. And so, but we weren't sure about funding and stuff like that. And that's what, the pieces of the puzzle. I need to shush so some other people can talk. So anyway, go ahead.
I think for those folks who are maybe not sure about funding, I think if you are interested in getting this started, I think a good way would be to start hosting those workshop sessions, tracking the attendance and kind of also tracking student feedback. And then you're able to bring that information to the folks at the table there and justify, there is a reason that this should happen. But I think that's great. That's very similar to the Northern Virginia Community College system near us, where they have that required 1 credit course. So none of these student success courses are required at Mason, but the students who do enroll in them usually are able to be connected with resources. So that helps them do a little bit better. Yeah, academic advisors are also a big one that teach at Mason as well. I think for this transfer one, since it was kind of starting off of the ground, off of something that hadn't been happening for a while, it was helpful to have somebody from for me to be from like the programming, university life kind of background, student life background, just to I'm used to kind of planning those things. But I think once it's more established, students love to hear from their academic advisors. Academics is like the #1 reason that they're at that institution. They would love to hear what they have to say. I'm also reading through some of the ones that I missed earlier about why that you all decided to come today. For those in the room that are already teaching the 1 credit course, I would be interested to, if you all would like to share anything with the room as well, because I'm also here as a learner.
I can share a little bit about ours. I work at Emory in Atlanta, and this is probably our 4th year of doing a 1 credit course for transfer students. I'm the Associate Director of Academic Advising, so I'm in advising, and similar to some of the rest of you, all of our advisors teach a 1 credit course that's required for our first year students. And so we piloted it with our transfer students, and kind of like what you said, Caroline, it's definitely our transfer students who are excited to learn more about Emory, who are probably going to be really successful and more outgoing about utilizing some of those resources. But it's interesting because a lot of our students, because we do serve mostly traditional students, a big reason that they enroll in the course is for community building. So it's interesting to hear how it works with the asynchronous course, because ours is in person, and during the pandemic when we did it over Zoom, it was awful. So I can't imagine doing it asynchronously. But it sounds like you've got a really good blueprint for doing that. But it's been really great. I think our transfer students really enjoy it, and kind of a great opportunity for them to see that they're not the only ones experiencing some of that transfer shock that you talked about, and just those other transitional issues that they go through.
Yeah, definitely. There are some students in the course that share they wish they had more community building for that in-person session. So my hope by offering both is that it's able to, whatever your experience is as a transfer student, you're able to get it. But most of the students who are enrolling, they just want to know more about the resources and kind of knowing how they're going to be more successful. And also, to answer the question in the chat, we have a Tau Sigma chapter at George Mason, but it is not very active. It's been a bit of a struggle to find students to take on those leadership positions for it. So most of the students who enroll in this course, I'm sure they might be on the trajectory to join Tau Sigma if they wanted to, but it isn't very active here at this time. We also at George Mason, pairing it with the course, we do monthly student support spaces. So we have a transfer support space every month where students are able to just drop in, talk with each other, because we don't have a transfer center here since we're under contemporary student services. So I try and have that support space cover that kind of transfer center piece that students may be looking for.
That space, is it an office or is it your office or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we have a contemporary student lounge here at Mason.
Right.
It's a very small space,
Okay.
but yes, that is where they're able to go.
Okay.
And then anytime I'm asking students to come to campus for that optional workshop space, I also have that in there. So that way they also know this is a space you can come back to anytime.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Funny thing is, in a building right next to us, we're actually in a big old house, which was the original chancellor's house, the admissions office is. And in the building next door, there's an office space we used to have. And then, of course, you know, budget cuts, not just with us, but across the state of North Carolina, every college, every one of the universities had to skim back. And we left that space and it is still empty. 5 years later, there's nobody in that space. And we want to turn that into a transfer center. And we've got the people, we know exactly how we would set it up, but the channels that you have to go through are just, it's
very
everybody
frustrating,
knows,
I'm sure.
everybody knows about channels, I'm sure, on here, but I mean, it's just, but this course is really something that's been on a lot of the transfer team's mind. So, okay.
Yeah, I'm also going to put my email in the chat. For anybody is welcome to reach out. I'm happy to continue this conversation and share any other things that have worked or not worked as well also.
Do you ever do presentations to other colleges, like the higher ups?
I haven't. That is something that I'm thinking of doing in the future. I'm still relatively new to working full time. I've only been in my current role for about 6 months, so I just came straight from my graduate program.